אלוהיך לכל העמים אשר אתה ירא מבניהם, וגם את הצירה ישלח. אדוני אלוהיך בעמד אבות הנשארים והנסתרים מפניך. Are you hearing an echo? Hector, if you're hearing this, where I'm hearing myself again and again, and I like myself, but I don't need to hear myself that many times. Lo tarotz mipnehem ki Adonai Elohecha bekirbecha el. I'm hearing myself again and again, and I like myself, but I don't need to hear myself that many times. El gadol v'nora. One second. All right, we'll see if that gets fixed. That was just the first aliyah. That's a long enough aliyah for a Shabbat morning, but that's only the first aliyah of the 3 for Ekev Shabbat afternoon. We're on the second aliyah, chapter 7, verse 22, in the book of Deuteronomy. Again, if you're in the Eitz Chaim Chumash, beginning on 1038, line 22. V'nashal Adonai Elohecha et hagoyim ha'el mipanecha ma'at ma'at lo tuchal kalotam maher ben tirbe alecha chayat hasadeh unatanam Adonai Elohecha lefanecha v'hamam mehuma gedola ad hishamadam v'natan malchehem biyadecha v'havata et shema mitachat hashamayim lo yidyatzev ish b'fanecha ad hishmidecha otam Pisilei Elohehem tisrafun ba'esh lo tachmod kesef v'zahav alehem v'lakachta halach pein tivakesh bo ki toavat Adonai Elohecha hu v'lo tavi toeva el beitecha v'ayita cherem kamohu shaketz tishaketzeinu v'ta'ev tita'avenu ki cherem hu kol ha'mitzvah asher anochi mitzavacha hayom tishmarun lasot Laman techiyun orbitem, uvatem virishtem et haaretz asher nishba l'Adonai lavotechem, v'zachartat kol haderech asher holichecha Adonai Elohecha ze 40 shana bamidbar, laman anodcha l'nasotecha ladat et asher bilvavcha hatishmor mitzvotav imlo. Vayancha vayarivecha vayachilcha taman asher lo yadata v'lo yad'un avotecha leman hodiacha ki lo ela al halechem levado yichyeh hadam ki al kol motza fi Adonai yichyeh hadam. Humanity did not live by bread alone, but rather everything that emerges from God's mouth. That is what we sustain ourselves on. Third aliyah. Simlatecha lo valta me'alecha v'raglecha lo batzeka zerbaim shana v'yadata im levavecha ki kasher yaser ish et beno Adonai Elohecha miasreka v'shahamarta mitzvot Adonai Elohecha lalecha b'dorchav ulira oto Ki Adonai Elohecha meviacha el eretz tova eretz nachle mayim ayinotu tomot yotzim babika ubahar eretz chita usora v'gefen utena v'rimon eretz zeit shemen udevash eretz asher lo v'miskenut tochal ba lechem lo techsar kol ba eretz asher avaneha barzel umeharet achtzov nechoshet v'achalta v'savata uverachta Et Adonai Elohecha ala aretz ashtova asher natan lach. So that first long aliyah of Parshat Ekev ends with the line, which gives us the obligation to do Birkat Hamazon. Interestingly, I've taught about this before, but it's worth mentioning. The Torah seems to say that you shall eat, be satisfied, and bless, which means that the more prominent blessing that we eat around food, we say around food, is the blessing after we eat. There's no mention in the Torah of blessing before we eat. That's a rabbinic overlay. And there's some interesting things to be said about that as to why the rabbis felt the kind of sacred chutzpah to add on to the obligation in the Torah, which is just to eat to bless on a full belly. The rabbis say, no, you bless even before your belly is full. Anticipatory gratitude, which I think is a beautiful idea. Okay, that's the first aliyah. Is there anyone who's with us on Zoom who has a yortzeit this week? If you raise your digital hand or just unmute so I can hear you. If going once.
I do.
I hear you, but I don't know who that is. I can't see.
Leah Gemmel.
Oh, hi, Leah. How are you?
Better days than yard sites.
Yes, I can imagine. Who is this for, Leah?
My father.
Okay, and I'm going to say an El Male for him. And his name?
Stephen Gemmel.
Stephen Gemmel. Okay, hold on one second. Let me just open up the page. So Leah, imagine, as it were, that you're with us in the sanctuary. Imagine that we had a minyan. Imagine that you're holding the Torah scroll and linking your memories of your father with your connection to this community and the Torah itself, and that you'd be in the middle of that sacred embrace as I recite this El Malay. Rachamim, Shochein Bamramim. Amtsei menucha nechona tachar kanfei Ashchina b'malot kedoshim utohorim kezohar harakia mazhirim lenishmat Stephen Gemmel shalach leolamo began Eden tehei menuchato Ana balarachamim hastireu beseter knafecha liolamim utzror betzrachim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo v'amar amen. Leah, just by the randomness of the way my screen is set up, I can't see you, but I know you're there. Others can see you, I'm sure. Is there a memory of your father that's coming to you right now that you'd like to share with us and give us a little window into who he was and how he is missed?
He was always immensely proud and supportive of everything I ever did, and that unwavering pride was one of my favorite things about him, and he never wavered in that.
Well, and I'm certain that a generation from now, with you and Adam very much in life, that your children will say the same thing about you and how they feel and held in your presence. So that is definitely passed on from generation to generation. We say Yehi Zichro Baruch. May his memory be a great blessing to you, Leah.
Thank you.
And I love hearing them in the background, even though I can't see them either.
Lots of noise.
That's good. It's the best kind of noise. Anyone else have a yortzeit this week? Okay. So we'll go to the quiet Amidah for Shabbat afternoon Mincha. If you were in the Lev Shalem Sidur, it's on page 223. If you're in the Slim Shalom for Shabbat, it's on page 234. And again, I don't have the pages for the one volume Sim Shalom in front of me, but it should be in the 550s, 560s, or 570s. The Amidah for Shabbat afternoon. We say that in a quiet whisper, and then we'll come out together for Aleinu. traps. צדקך צדק לעולם, בתורך אמת, בצדקך אלוהים אמרם אשר סגדלות אלוהים מי כמוך, צדקך קריה, על משפטך תהום רבה, אדם ובהמה תושיע אדוני. עלינו 231 lev shalem, the full lev, as it were, huh? And 248 in the slim shalom.
עלינו לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא עשנו כגורי הארצות, ולא שמענו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם, וגורלנו ככל המונה, ואנחנו קוראים משתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים, הקדוש ברוך הוא, שכונות השמיים ויסד הארץ, ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל, ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרמים, הוא אלוהינו אין עוד, אמת מלכנו אפס זולתו, ככתוב בתורתו, ידעת היום והשבותה, אלה בלבביך, כי אדוני הוא אלוהים, בשמיים ממעל, ועל הארץ מתחת, אין עוד, אין עוד. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו אחד.
Kadisha Tom, all those who are mourning or observing your site, Mourner's Kaddish, page 249 in the Slim Shalom and in the Lev Shalem 232. Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei rabbah v'yalma divrach yerutei v'yamlich malchutei v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol beit Yisrael v'agala v'zman kari v'meru amen. Yehei shemei rabbah mevorach leolam leomeo maya yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitramam v'yitnaseh Yitadar v'yitaleh v'yitalal shemei dekudesha brichu le'ela min kol birchata v'shirata tushbechata v'nechamata tamiran be'alma v'yimeru amen. Yehei shlama rabba min shemaya v'chayim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'yimru amen. Return the leadership over to our intern, Rachel Cohn, whom I have not seen in person in such a long time, but has been such an integral part of our Beth Am community throughout this pandemic. And we're looking forward to hearing some Torah from you. Just the way that the laptop is angled, Rachel, I'll be sitting right over there listening to you. I can't, well, they'll be looking at you, but I'm going to be sitting right over there. So I will listen to Rachel, and we'll study with her for about 20, 25 minutes. And then we'll do Mari and Havdalah. Rachel, bevakasha.
Thank you, Rabbi Kligfeld. I'll be the voice from the behind the curtain or whatnot. So hello, everybody. I think this may be the last scheduled thing I have right now on the, they've like extended some internship things I've been able to be involved with over the summer, and the new round of the rabbinic residents, I believe is the term they're using in the coming iteration of the program, are starting in August. So anyway, this time had me kind of reflecting on the past year with Beth Am, and I think nicely fits with this part of the Torah that we're reading, where Moshe is in his stretch in Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, where he's looking back on the journey that they've been on. He's encouraging other people to look back on the journey they've been on. And so this piece that I picked out from Parshat Ekev today is ultimately, at least what was drawing me to it, about reflecting on journeys that we see in the text or our own lives, as in whatever span of time that makes sense for you right now. So we're jumping in. If you have the sheet, great. If you don't, also great. We'll be in Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2. So I'll read this first line, and then we'll have questions and conversation interspersed. So Moshe is relating to the people again in this section as he's preparing to not enter the promised land and prepare them to go on and be a thriving people without them. This is in his many speeches and sections of advice. He says, "Remember the whole path that God has made you travel in the wilderness these past 40 years, that God might test you by hardships to learn what was in your hearts, whether you would keep God's commandments or not." So what I imagine is, part of what's going through Moshe's mind here is a lot of that past 40 years has not been easy. And it might be tempting for the people to sugarcoat, to overlook certain parts of it. And he's reminding them to remember the whole path, highs, lows, mediums, everything that they've been on together. So I'm just curious to hear from you what your natural inclinations tend to be. If you go on a road trip, a program, a conference, anything, you come back and people say, "How was it?" Do you tend to recount the highs, the lows, the everything? What's your usual style?
I think we talk about the bad stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Lows. I have all I used to be a whitewater guide. I don't tell anybody about the successful whitewater trips I guided. I tell about the disasters, the boats I wrapped around trees, the people I pulled out of the water. That's what I describe. That's the way life works.
Yeah.
You don't talk about the good trips. You talk about the disaster trips.
Even as you're mentioning it right now, I'm drawn in to say, oh, wow, that sounds adventurous. Tell me more. Yeah, so those are sometimes the, it's like person walks down the street and does random acts of kindness. That's not always what's making the headlines, in part because the kind of, the challenging stuff is sometimes what draws us in and what we remember too. Okay, other thoughts?
This is Marizon. I'm a little different from Brent.
Mm-hmm.
When I come back from a trip, I tell people the good things,
mm-hmm.
The fun things. And nowadays with the, with the internet, my family and friends, I send them pictures so they know where I'm going, and tell them so it's a little different.
Right. So a taste of either end of things that you might be drawn to, kind of highlight the positive or highlight the negative. Was there another hand? Back racks?
Yeah, back racks. I think I remember the good stuff in the sense of, you may not remember the bad stuff immediately, but you want to remember the good stuff, because that's life. And when you're looking back at stuff, that is part of the thing you look forward to, and thankful for having that. Thanks for having that opportunity to see or do whatever you needed to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that those that's often what keeps us going, you know, like the remembering the beautiful parts and the highlights that, you know, like sometimes the problems that come up on a trip, you know, I'll try to think in 5 days, will this matter? In 5 weeks, will this matter? But like the good stuff does matter, like years down the road. So I imagine that if you picture Moshe as speaking to all of the Israelites, they had their own, you know, mix of inclinations of the people who would have said, oh, like we left Egypt and it was so hot, we never had enough food, da, 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 da. And then the other, you know, other groups of people who would get to the promised land and, you know, almost discount all of the hardships that they went through along the way. Oh, we got here, it's all good now. Oh, sweet, we have our, you know, our own land. So when I see this line of saying, remember the whole path, I kind of picture him speaking to people on any part of that spectrum, saying it, you know, it's all worthy of being solidified in our memory together. So any other thoughts or questions on that verse before we go to the next one? All right, so immediately after that, the next verse, Moshe goes on saying, God subjected you to the hardship of hunger and then gave you manna to eat, which neither you nor your fathers had ever known, was a new thing. No one knew what manna was before that. Okay. In order to teach you that a person does not live on bread alone, but that a person may live by all that comes from the mouth of God. So we'll unpack this metaphorically in a second, but just to kind of take this this section of the verse at face value for a second, I see this as an extension kind of what was being said in the first verse on our sheet, saying a person doesn't live on bread alone, a person lives by all that comes from the mouth of God. So if you're only going to remember God giving you the manna, you're not going to remember the part where you're hungry, and kind of vice versa. If you only remembered you were hungry without the manna, that's not a full picture of the story either. So Moshe is saying, yes, a person lives on the bread that you're getting from God, but also by every word, law, any other part of the discourse that comes from God, which, you know, includes, as we've seen, like sometimes God is happy with the people, sometimes God is not happy with the people, but this is Moshe making a plea to everybody to say all of that, all of your relationship with God on that journey is important to hold on to. So to now unpack this, because, you know, in this section we read about the importance of food and the blessings that Rabbi Kligfeld was speaking about. So there's a lot of different dimensions of eating food and how it nourishes us physically, spiritually, et cetera, that go into this portion. And one commentary along those lines that intrigued me is this little nugget of midrash I included at the bottom of the source sheet if you have it. And if you don't, I will read it out loud. It's part of a larger commentary on places where the word all comes up. And when it says all, what does it mean? Are you including this and this, good and bad, etc.? So this is kind of one piece riffing on this idea of what does it, you know, when all comes up, because it's commenting on what we just read in chapter 8, verse 3, a person lives by all that comes from the mouth of God. Okay, so this section of the Midrash, Sifrei Devarim, one of the rabbinic commentaries, added story layers, etc., on this book of Deuteronomy. Thus it is written, quoting the verse we just read, to make it known that you live not through bread alone, to make it known to you that not through bread alone shall a man live. Bread is midrash, like the thing that it's appearing in itself. All that comes forth from the mouth of God shall a person live. That refers to halachot, laws, and agadot, stories. So interestingly, this rabbinic commentary takes that line about bread that could be seen very literally as, you know, like you're surviving on bread, manna, the food that they got, and turns it into surviving on different dimensions of holy texts, which is very, you know, like the rabbis like thinking that these texts that they're reading and writing and engaging with are very critical to survival. So they're making that very, you know, kind of concrete here. So I wanted to take a moment before we, you know, like kind of apply it more metaphorically to the journey and whatnot again. Let's just compare and contrast those three different types of texts that they mentioned to see if we can tease out different threads that they might be getting to. Okay, so the three different kind of texts that this piece mentioned again were Midrash, which is rabbinic commentary. If people have questions about these different sort of categories of texts I'm naming, I'm happy to talk more broadly about what they are. But, you know, let's say for now, Midrash is kind of like this slice that we're getting here, the rabbis reading in layers of symbolism and extra stories into usually biblical texts. Halakha, laws, the commandments about how to interpret the rules, basically. And Agadah, which is stories, which can be a part of Midrash and can appear in a number of different ways. So if you're thinking about like the Jewish canon, do you see these as all functioning similarly? How do they add different pieces to our understanding of Judaism? Joanna?
So I'll start with halachot and agadot and then go back to Midrash. So I think halachot leads us towards like a disciplined life, which I think there's merit to that sense of discipline, that sense of allegiance. And also it brings about a certain sense of communal standard that, like, to have a functioning society, you know, I might, you know, sort of develop a system that works for me, and you might develop a different system that works for you. And they might both be good systems, but in the same town, we can't have people both driving on the right side of the road and on the left side. So it leads to a personal disciplined life, but also a sense of building community when you have that. Agadot, I think, are what give us our values, right? Like from those stories, we derive values. And then when we talk about Midrash and rabbinic interpretation, to that is the ongoing legacy, that there is a sense of evolution, there's a sense of needing to apply it and adapt it to our own times, and that Torah isn't a static thing.
Beautiful. So many interesting layers. Out of curiosity, Joanna, if we're going to go back to kind of putting this mentality back onto the a person can't live on bread alone, and like bread being Midrash, like I'll open this to Joanna or anybody else. Like, it's interesting to me that bread, kind of the basic sustenance, that when they assign to Midrash. Like in my mind, if I were to take a guess, I would maybe give that like halakha, kind of like Joanna was saying, that's like kind of a provide structure, basis. Yeah, anybody have another 2 cents about why Midrash was the one that they might be comparing to bread?
Because I first of all, you're listening to the unwashed and uneducated here, but I would say that the Midrash and Agadot is what gives you the passion. Without that, the law is useless. It's what the stories are what inspire you to pursue the practice of halakha. So that's why it's given a predominance over the laws themselves, because it's the stories that inspire, that turn the heart, that allow the heart to then follow the law.
Right. I'm thinking based on what you're saying, you know, like when you go to a nice restaurant and they have the bread basket, that's what they give you first to kind of like entice you before you get to anything else, or you think about ordering vegetables if you're going to. It's like that's what might bring you in, kind of like the values that you're describing that might, you know, pull us in when we're reading Agadah. Beautiful. Joanna, do you have another comment, or is your hand just still raised from before?
No, I mean, I can respond to that, but I see that Marlise is also raising her hand, and she didn't have a chance to speak. So I'm happy to hear what Marlies has to say. And then if there's time, I'm happy to share another thought.
Great. Okay, so let's go to Marlies.
Okay. Oh, thank you. I guess I would guess the commentator believes that halacha and agadah are coming from the mouth of God more so than midrash. It's midrash is more of individual people's commentary or guessing or imagining about what's going on, even though they.
So good point. If we're looking back to, you can't live on bread alone, you have to live from anything that comes from the mouth of God. It's almost like the bread was the easy part, and the rest of what came from God is like maybe the harder stuff, some of like the halakha comparison. And
I'm just kind of trying to looking at, I mean, at least from what the tradition says, it is, commandments are from God, and the stories in the Torah, I mean, the Torah is from God, and then midrash is later. So
right. So that was kind of my second follow-up question on the sheet, the like second sub bullet point, saying, are these even all words of God? Like they're commenting on a verse about everything coming from the mouth of God, but at least where I'm sitting, like midrash is the uniquely rabbinic human like element that gets added in. So that's also that's intriguing to me that they're viewing it in that way. We can say it's divinely inspired, but I think even the rabbis will agree that that's some rabbis take on this text and that midrash. So yes, very thank you for pointing that out. That's a fascinating element here too. Tybal?
It's actually a question because not all teachers that I've had, but some teachers are careful to say that the full term is midrash halacha and midrash agadah, which means that midrash isn't separate from either. I mean, I couldn't tell, was it meant to be sometimes commentators do a word play on what the root is, but that didn't seem to work. So I just felt I wasn't understanding the distinction.
Okay, so if I had a whiteboard, what I would do here is I'd put midrash, halacha, and agadah, and underneath midrash, I would make two branches, and within midrash, there's two subcategories, which is midrash halacha. That's more, it adds interpretation and sometimes wordplay and puns. There's wordplay in like kind of all kinds of midrash, but midrash halacha providing more commentary on kind of like either line by line how the text is going or the halachic implications for what comes out of it. And then midrash agadah is more of the straight up adding layers of stories, but separate from the genre of midrash altogether is, just halachic works that say, how do when do I light my candles on Friday night? This is when you would do it and how you would do it. And agadah can sometimes refer to the stories that appear in midrash, but could also more broadly be interpreted as stories that themselves, like the creation story, you could say is a story, that kind of thing. Does that answer your question at all?
Yes.
Okay. Awesome. Great clarification point. Okay, let's, Joanna, I'm gonna add kind of a maybe closing piece and then open it up for whatever else is on people's mind. Is that cool? All right, so, we've named these different aspects of each of these three kinds of texts. The point, again, that they're getting back to is a person can't live on whatever item or category of text alone, but lives by all that comes from the mouth of God. So my closing question for you is kind of, how do any of these different threads of Judaism, how can they help people live? And of these three kinds of things we've named, what for you is personally sustaining? If you're imagining Judaism to be, maybe not as literally as the manna, but something that we've seen even in this challenging year has kept people going. So I'm curious to hear from you how, in general, any of these categories you might think might keep people sustained, or to share personally, if any of those three categories is what really speaks to you.
I mean, if no one else has anything to share on that, I will say that for me, like when I think about, living through this pandemic, I really think it's rabbinic innovation that has gotten us through, the flexibility of our rabbis and leaders to say that we have to adapt Judaism to a reality that we have never experienced before. And there has to be some flexibility, innovation, creativity in how we go about doing that.
Mm-hmm. And, interestingly, when you were sharing before, it almost sounded like you were making a case for like halakha being unifying. And now you're also kind of pointing out the ways that changes, within the halachic system, in at least the conservative movement's case, also has been what's like kept people going. So that, it's interesting. I like what I hear kind of from your sharing both those pieces is at different times and in different ways, different aspects of these components have been what's essential to keep us going.
So what I was going to draw before,
yeah,
and it's all the more relevant now, an analogy to a house where I see halakha and agadah as the foundation, and then midrash and the rabbinic interpretation is the house that's built upon it. So on the one hand, you can have a house without a foundation, but on the other hand, if you only build a foundation and not a house on top of that, you also don't have anything.
Beautiful. I love that imagery. Anybody else want to say how you see it, how it makes sense to you? Marlies?
I guess I would just say that during this past period of time, it's been sustaining for me to, in different settings like this, be able to discuss, these, both halakha, agadah, and then have our own commentary about it.
Your own midrash as it emerges, hot off the press. Thank you for that, Marlies. It's been, I've enjoyed being able to connect with folks also. I've been in the satellite campus of Beth Am in the Chicago suburbs. So, so that's been a nice perk. So I'll just leave you again with, the words we started with, to remember the whole path and to remember these, not living on bread alone, living by all that comes from the mouth of God, that there's so many different strands of what those holy words, sacred communities, that can mean so many different things for so many people. And we have a lot of different tools in our Jewish toolbox that I hope we will all continue to draw on to build, that the house that Joanna described and the totality of a Jewish experience that works for us, and brings some of that wholeness, the whole path, that we're trying to hold on to in our collective memory. So thank you all for learning together tonight. And Rabbi Klickfeld, I was gonna jump to do Mariv unless you were specifically planning to. I don't know what you're.
I'd love to be led by you and Mariv. I'll just add one thing that this is obvious, but worth saying, that what we just experienced in the last 25 minutes added to the canon of Midrash Halakha and Midrash Agadah. And that's the amazing thing about an unfolding tradition that burst into reality at one moment, according to our tradition, and yet is still being born, right? So every time we discuss these topics in the way that Rachel has led us, we're actually contributing to the expansion of the entire canon. So it was lovely to hear all of your comments, and Yasher Koach in your teaching, Rachel. Rachel, do you have the page numbers in front of you?
I do.
Okay, so then Bavakasha.
All right, so we will begin on 264 in Lev Shalem, 281 in the Slim Shalom Shabbat edition, or 200 in the regular Sim Shalom version. והוא רחום יכפר עוון ולא ישחית, והרבה להשיב אפו ולא יאיר כל חמתו. אדוני הושיע המלך יעננו ביום קוראנו. ברוך אדוני אלוהינו. ומעביר יום ומביא לילה, וממטיל בין יום ובין לילה, אדוני צבאות שמו. אל חי וקיים תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד. ברוך אתה אדוני המעריב הרבים. אהבת עולם בית ישראל. ואהבתך אל תסיר ממנו לעולמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אוהב עמו ישראל. אל מלך נאמן שמע ישראל אדוני אלוהינו אדוני אחד. אני אדוני אלוהיכם אשר הוצאתי אתכם מארץ מצרים להיות לכם אלוהים. אני אדוני אלוהיכם. אמת ואמונה כל זאת וקיים אלוהים. ומלכותו ברצון קיבלו עליהם משה ומרים ובני ישראל לחנו שירה בשמחה רבה ואמרו כולם מי כמוך באלים אדוני מי כמוך נדר בקודש תורת תהילות תוסיף אלה מלכותך ראו בניך בוקי הים לבני משה זה עלינו ואמרו אדוני ימלוך לעולם ועד ונאמר כי פדה אדוני את יעקב וגאלו מיד חזק ממנו ברוך אתה אדוני גאל ישראל. השיבנו אדוני אלוהינו לשלום והעמידנו מלכנו לחיים. ושמור צאתנו ובואנו לחיים ולשלום מעתה ועד עולם. ברוך אתה אדוני שומר עמו ישראל לעד. כי המלכות שלך היא ולעולמי עד תמלוך בכבוד כי אין לנו מלך אלא אתה ברוך אתה אדוני המלך בכבודו תמיד ימלוך עלינו לעולם ועד ועל כל מעשיו.
Amen.
We will skip the Chatzi Kaddish and go to the whispered Amidah for the conclusion of Shabbat with a few special additions for the conclusion of Shabbat. Nothing else. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu. Ve'al kol Yisrael. Ve'al kol yoshvei tevel. Ve'imru, imru. Amen. If you are still in the midst of your whispered Amidah, please continue at whatever pace feels good for you. We will continue together skipping the Chatzi Kaddish and going to the verses for the conclusion of Shabbat. Oh, well, just some quick page numbers, sorry. Let's say 279, 292, or 682, thereabouts, just after the Chatzi Kaddish. Vihi noam Adonai Eloheinu aleinu, uma'aseh yadeinu konena aleinu, uma'aseh yadeinu konenehu. Yoshev v'seter elyon mitzvah shadayit lonan. Yikra'eni v'enehu imo anochi v'tzara, achaltzehu v'achabdehu, orech yamim asbiyehu v'arehu b'shuati, orech yamim asbiyehu v'arehu b'shuati. If you're in Lev Shalem, we go back to 2:16. Ve'ata kadosh shetzilot Yisrael v'karazel zeh v'amar, kadosh 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 Adonai tzvaot meloch haaretz kivodo. Vatisaeni rafesh machra kol rash gadol, baruch kavod Adonai mimkomo. Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. We will now go to Aleinu on page 281, 297, or 696.
Rachel, would it be okay with you if Lev led Aleinu?
Please.
Aleinu l'shabeach ladon hakol latet gedula liyotzei breshit shelo asanu kegulei haratzot velo samanu kamishpachot adama shelo samukenu kahem vegor aleinu kechol hamona v'anagnu kolim u'mishtachavim u'modim לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא שהוא נוטה שמיים ויסד הארץ ומושב יקרו בשמיים ממעל ושכינתו זו בגובהי מרומים הוא אלוהינו אין עוד ממלכנו אפס תולתו ככתוב בתורתו מידת היום ומחשבותה אל לבביך כי אדוני הוא לאלוהים בשמיים ממעל ועל הארץ מתחת אין עוד ונאמר והיה אדוני ולמלך על כל הארץ ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד ושמו אחד.
Yasher Koach Lev, thank you so much. We will now finish up our Mariv service with Mourner's Kaddish Yatom. Yitzkadal v'yitzkadash shemei rabah.
Amen.
Ve'alma divrach kirutei v'yamlich malchutei. בחייכון וביומייכון ובחיי דכל בית ישראל בעגלה ובזמן קריב ואמרו אמן. יהי שמי רבה מברך לעולם ולעלמי עלמיה. יתברך וישתבח ויתפאר ויתרומם ויתנשא. ויתהדר ויתעלה ויתהלל שמי דקודשה בריחו. לעילה מן כל ברכתה ושירתה, תושבחתה ונחמתה, דאמירן בעלמה ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
יהי שלמה רבה מן שמיה וחיים עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו אמן.
Amen.
עושה שלום ממרומיו, הוא יעשה שלום עלינו ועל כל ישראל ואמרו amen. So we will now welcome in our new week with Havdalah together. I need to go run and get a lighting device, so I'll be right back. I will sing. I don't know if it will be audible from the kitchen. Yeah, nine, 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 nine.
Nine, 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 and nine, nine, nine. Get the matches. Hi, hi, and nine, nine, hi, 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 nine, 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 nine. Hi, na na ya na 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 na.
הנה אל ישועתי, אפתח ולא אחד. יוזי וזמרת יד, אדוני ויהי לי לישועה, ושטת מים בששון, ממעייני הישועה, לאדוני הישועה, על עמך ברכתך סלה, אדוני צבאות עמנו. נשגב לנו אלוהי יעקב סלה, אדוני צבאות, אשרי אדם בוטח בך, אדוני יושיע, המלך יעננו ביום קורנו, ליהודים הייתה אורה, בשמחה וששון ביקר, כן תהיה לנו כוס ישועות אשא, ובשם אדוני אקרא, יאי ני 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 ני, יאי ני 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 ני, ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא פרי הגפן.
Amen.
ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מיני בשמים. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, בורא מאורי האש. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם, המבדיל בין קודש לחול, בין אור לחושך, בין ישראל לעמים, בין יום השביעי לששת ימי המעשה. ברוך אתה אדוני המבדיל בין קודש לחול. המבדיל בין קודש לחול, חול, חול, חטאותינו הו ימחול, זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול, וככוכבים בלילה. זרענו וכספנו ירבה ירבה כחול, וככוכבים בלילה. שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב. שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב, שבוע טוב. אליהו הנביא, אליהו התשבי, אליהו, אליהו, אליהו הגלעדי. במהרה בימינו יבוא אלינו, עם משיח בן דוד, Mashiach ben David. Wishing you all a very, very sweet week ahead. Thank you for being part of the learning and experience together this week, and every other week that I've been with you throughout this internship. So Shavua Tov to all.
Shavua Tov, everybody. Have a good
Tov.
week.
Rabbi, what was the
Hatzlacha Rabbah, Rachel.
Thank you.
Rabbi, why was the morning service so early?
Essentially because the bat mitzvah family sent out invitations to their family and friends based on conversations we had early in the year when we were actually considering doing some Shabbat morning services at 8:30. In fact, we did them early in the pandemic because before we were sure we had the tent every week, we wanted to do it earlier so that we get the shade of the building. And we didn't realize that they had made their invitations based on that until late in the week this week. And they already had friends coming in from out of town and they had sent the Zoom link out. So we just decided better to announce to our
It was
community
actually
one
kind of
email.
nice. It was actually kind of
it was
nice.
done at
It was very
11:10.
nice. No complaints. I just didn't know. I didn't know for states.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now your first day.
Now for states.
Rabbi,
Not that they did full Korea, is that it?
Say that again.
Not full Korea.
Not full Korea.
This morning was not full Korea. No.
Okay, so we
Yeah.
thought
Rabbi?
that's for the 8:30.
Yes.
whenever there's a simcha, does that mean it'll be a different Zoom link?
No.
I had
It was a
problem this morning.
different, it was
I had
a
a problem this
different
morning,
Zoom
too.
link this morning because I was on the usual and then I thought maybe a different one and then I went into the email. It was a different link. So I'm
Yeah,
just
different link today because
interested.
I had to go into the Shabbat bulletin one. I could not use the normal one I normally use.
Right. So I
Yes.
just want to know for future, if it's a B'nai mitzvah, will that mean there's a different link every time?
It is often the case that when there's a bar bat mitzvah, there's a unique link made for that service, which we're trying to standardize it, but that is often the case. And it's complicated in terms of the relationship between YouTube and Zoom. And also, believe it or not, depends on which of the several different technicians we have who are working with us. But yes, to this morning, it was a special link created for the bat mitzvah, not the standard Shabbat morning service. Yeah.
Fortunately, I was not that silly that I'd waited 10 minutes. I kind of realized I had to figure out something else, and I had to go to my boss.
So I went to services this morning in Tucson, Arizona at Onshai, the conservative synagogue. You guys have no idea how good we have it. That's all I want to say.
On that
were there
note,
in-
Shavua
I
Tov.
do.
Yes, you
Wait,
would too.
Joanna, is Joanna still there?
Gutava.
Joanna and I do because we come from, she's Toronto and I'm in Maryland. We know, that's why we come.
Were you in
It's
person,
really-
Brant, or?
I went in person and it was like the air conditioning was broken. It was, it's monsoon season in Tucson. It was like a sweatbox. They're very nice people. This isn't an indictment of the rabbinic staff or something. I'm just saying the liveliness with which we have services, whether they're on Zoom or out in the back, there's no comparison to that. It's just not the same thing. That's all I'm saying. It was